Welcome to this week's Techniques in 2 video. This is on the concept of story. So let's start by talking about what I mean by story. I've probably mentioned this in a discussion board at some point somewhere, but when I use the word story, as confusing as this might be, story refers to the narrative of any creative work, any creative work with a narrative component, which really should be any creative work. There is some kind of narrative, even if it's sort of more embedded. So within a poem that is more reflective, an essay that is more meditative, there is still going to be some kind of story there. When I talk about story, I think about a 4-part concept that I have as it relates to structuring a creative piece. And so what you're going to see, this can be a little confusing, is story is one of the 4 components, but also I think when I think about the construction of story more broadly, I think of this 4-part structure. And so I'm going to share this in this video in the hopes that it might help you as you're thinking about some of the things that you concern yourself with when you are building a piece from the ground up. So the 4 parts that I'm talking about are what I call, and I'll define all of these: premise, plot, story, there it is, and theme. So let's explain what these are. So premise and plot are related, and we'll get to that in a second. But premise is what I call there's a couple ways you can think of this. It's either the inciting event or what your story's external components are about. So just to give an example, a very famous example, I suppose, in The Lord of the Rings, the premise is that Frodo has been tasked with returning a ring to Mordor. Okay, so that's the premise of the story. There's this ring, it needs to be destroyed, has to get taken to Mount Doom. That's the premise. Plot are the events that are depicted in your story. Again, story here meaning whatever kind of creative work you're writing, not necessarily fiction. So in The Lord of the Rings, that would be the various events that we actually see unfold on the page in the books. Okay. So story and theme are a little different. So story is really the question of what is it that makes the moments that are chosen significant? Why are these parts of why these specific moments, scenes, experiences from the central figure's life, or the central figure's plural lives? Most stories cannot share with readers every single second of every single day of a character or figure's life. And so we as writers choose particular ones for some reason. And there's usually something significant about them. And so that's what story means, in my view, is why those moments. And then theme is the exploration or the ideas that the writer wants the reader to consider. I like to think of this as evoking the question in some capacity: what does it mean to be a human being? That's when I think about theme. I don't necessarily think of a moral lesson. I think of this kind of question. So just a couple more things about this. Premise and plot are usually the external components, the things that actually unfold on the page directly, that readers do not need to do inference and intuition in order to identify, because they're simply there, overtly shared with us on the page. Story and theme are usually these more internal components, those that are subtly evoked for the reader to discover and to interpretively figure out. So through action, through dialogue, through description, things are evoked for us. The things that characters say, the things that they do, the way things are described reveals to us the significance and the meaning. Okay. So every great piece of creative work manages to balance the two together at some stage. You don't need to know all of these things from the start. I rarely do, but there are always those questions are in the back of my mind. What is this story about? What am I trying to say? Why are these moments important to these characters? As I am making my way through the premise and the plot. And those things usually reveal themselves to me at some point. So as you explore your drafts of your various things, keep these 4 parts and those 2 kinds of components, the more directly on the page versus the more subtly evoked, in mind, and see what emerges. And if you keep that structure in mind, I find that at some point in the drafting stage, even if you don't, and understandably don't know what those pieces all are from the beginning, they will start to take shape as long as you have them in the back of your mind.